show. I miss.
Ah, yes. Don't we all miss Buffy the Vampire Slayer? What a fantastic show. Ah, so sad it's over. Anyway, let's talk about patents. This is for CS262, or possibly for CS260 once we get the curriculum changed. So, in the United States at least, the right to patent is established in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8, often known as the Copyright Clause. We talked about this earlier when we talked about copyrights. Now, patents cover discoveries, while copyrights tend to cover writings or other kinds of creative works. So patents are typically granted for things like a process, a machine, an article of manufacture, a composition of matter, or an improvement to any of the above items. It's important to note that most patents are actually for incremental improvements to known technology. So the innovation is some incremental change, some small evolutionary type improvement, rather than some big revolution of some completely brand new thing. So in order to patent something, what you're trying to patent must have utility, it must be non-obvious, it must be novel, and it must be disclosed in the patent application, how to make this thing that you're making or what it is that you're making. And each of these have been interpreted differently by the courts over the years in a series of different types of decisions. We'll look at just enough information to kind of scratch the surface of this very interesting issue. So the first part about utility, you can only patent useful things. The U.S. Patent and Trade Office, USPTO, it doesn't grant patents on inventions with no utility, things that the Patent Office does not find to be useful, or on inventions such as a perpetual motion machine, which is very, very unlikely to exist. Over the years, people have tried to patent a number of different inventions to generate infinite amounts of energy and things like that, and the Patent Office just won't grant patents on those things because even if they disclose in the patent application how they're going to go about building their infinite energy generator, it's not really very likely that that infinite energy generator is ever going to work if you take any physics or talk to any physicists or anything like that. So you can't be granted a patent on something like that. Now the novelty, whatever you're patenting must be novel. That means it can't have been disclosed anywhere in the entire world prior to the patent application being filed. Now, there's a term prior art, which you may have heard, that comes up a lot with regard to this requirement for novelty of things that can be patented. So a patent has to cover a novel invention. That means that any prior art is going to invalidate that patent. Now, this is a really, really interesting issue, particularly with regards to software patents, because the claim will often be out there that, hey, this particular thing that this organization is trying to patent is actually just a version of something that, Xerox PARC Research Lab had in the late 1970s or something. But it can be expensive to conduct these searches to try to discover this prior art in order to invalidate a patent that perhaps another company holds and is using to sue you. And so there is now on Stack Exchange, patents.stackexchange.com, this is a crowdsourced site that is aimed at helping people invalidate or possibly to validate software patents. It's relatively new, although I started following this a couple years ago and it still exists, so apparently it's successful enough. Stack Exchange, by the way, is the same site that hosts Stack Overflow. So here is a blog article talking about the launch of this site coming. This is from late 2012, so I'm recording this in almost exactly 2 years later. I'm recording this in September of 2014. Let's go ahead and just click this for the heck of it and see what happens to be up here right now. So you can see people have posted stuff. It's a question and answer site for people interested in improving and participating in the patent system. And so you can look at a lot of these things. Interactive map, is Apple trying to patent 40-year-old GIS methods? So patent application prior art request. So this person is looking for anybody to post that might have information about GIS, Global Information Systems technology, from decades ago, because they're looking at a patent application from Apple and they're trying to decide, hey, this patent looks like something from a long time ago, but I don't have particular specific examples of prior art. Maybe I can crowdsource this to the community, and the community might be able to come up with more specific references that I can use in case there's some sort of a lawsuit. And you can see it a lot of these other types of requests here and the types of responses that are coming in. Some of these are general questions about patent ownership and royalty. Some of them are very specific prior art requests and so on. So this is a really, really interesting site. I haven't really looked at it much in the last year or so. I look at it every fall a little bit before CS262 when we talk about this issue. But if you're looking for something to read further about, or to go ahead and try to use for a presentation for this course, or for if you end up doing one of the constitutional law classes or something like that, there's some really, really interesting stuff here. So, non-obviousness. This is a very interesting criteria. In the U.S., this is defined by the courts as not obvious to a, quote, person having ordinary skill in the art. This leads to the acronym FOSITA, or FOSITA. I'm not entirely sure how that's pronounced. I've only seen it written. But the FOSITA, person having ordinary skill in the art, this is a hypothetical person who is competent but not a genius at a particular field. So we'd be talking about, in physics, a competent physicist, not necessarily Einstein. In computer scientists, in computer science, we'd be talking about probably like me, not necessarily Bill Gates, or Linus Torvalds, or one of the other, Alan Turing, something like that. Now, FOSITA is interpreted differently in different fields. This is actually very important. So the factors that the courts may consider in determining what ordinary skill in the art, well, what's the education level of the inventor, the type of problems that are encountered, the prior art solutions, the rapidity with which innovations are made, educational level of active workers, and so on. So this is really important when you're talking about things like pharmaceutical research, which typically require a PhD in chemistry. The amount of education, the amount of experience, background, equipment required for somebody to be described as having an ordinary skill in the arts is very different than if you're talking about computer programming, where, if you have a couple years of programming under your belt, you can actually do quite a lot of things. Not necessarily the case in every field. So these are some of the criteria that are going to be used by the courts to try to determine what is an appropriate benchmark to use to determine what ordinary skill in the art for that particular field would be, because it's going to vary by industry. Now, you must disclose your invention in the patent application. So this is important. You can't patent the idea for building a flying broomstick. Right, if you want to build a flying broomstick so that you can have a patent on it and sell your flying broomstick to people who want to create Quidditch leagues, you have to actually put in the patent application a sufficiently detailed plan for how a person having ordinary skill in the arts, a FOSITA, could follow your plan to build the flying broomstick without what the courts have called, quote, undue experimentation. So you don't have to provide every single specific detail down to, everything in the patent application. That would be too much level of detail, but you have to give enough detail that somebody having ordinary skill in the arts could look at your plan and then create the flying broomstick. So, flying, broomstick manufacturers or something like that. Now, of course, undue experimentation, this is another legal term, and there's, of course, various court decisions and different legal precedents that have determined what constitutes undue experimentation. One thing you can see about a lot of these questions with copyrights and patents and trademarks and trade secrets is a lot of what these terms mean have been defined through the legal process over the years with a number of different court decisions. But the take-home message here, you have to disclose how you're going to build your invention in the patent application. You can't just say, I'm patenting flying broomsticks. Nobody can ever build one. You have to give the exact process. or at least enough detail for the process somebody could follow it. And if somebody comes up with a way to build a flying broomstick using a completely different process, then good on them. Your patent application didn't cover their process, it only covered your process. There's another term used, two terms really, predictable versus unpredictable arts. So the patent office will differentiate between predictable arts. They tend to look at machinery or software, and unpredictable arts such as chemistry or pharmaceuticals. Unpredictable arts require much more specific details for the patent office to assume that a person with ordinary skill in the arts could actually carry out the process. This is why software patents tend to be very vague, because they're lumped in with machinery, which tends to get lumped in with different types of manufacturing or inventions, things that are complicated but not as complicated as the process for, refining all the different molecules that you would need to build some new sort of pharmaceutical. So those require significantly more detail in order to get this done without undue experimentation. So predictable arts, you can have these very sort of non-specific flowcharts. If you go do a Google patent search for different types of software patents, or really a lot of types of patents, you'll see these very non-specific flowcharts, whereas the unpredictable arts tend to have very, very specific layout, almost like a lab report write-up with a very specific criteria for how you could go ahead and create this. Now, in the past, patents have been overturned, even if the patent has been granted. Later, it's been overturned by the courts, because the courts have gone in and ruled that the application was not sufficiently detailed. So there are trade-offs here. If you're filing for a patent, you need to put in enough information that the court's not going to determine that undue experimentation was required to go ahead and build your invention, but you don't want to spend so much time on the patent application that you're not, running your business or whatever. So there's definitely trade-offs here. Some things you can't patent. You can't patent naturally occurring things. I don't have a link to this, but if you Google, I think there were a couple of famous cases. One might have been with chicken nuggets. One had something to do with shrimp. Somebody wanted to patent the idea of shrimp with the shells chopped off already, and the courts determined that you could patent a process for removing the shells from the shrimp, but you can't process, shrimp with the shells moved off. Shrimp are naturally occurring things. You can't patent laws of nature. So if you're a physicist and you discover some important new something or other about how galaxies are formed or whatever, you can't go ahead and patent those formulae. You can't patent physical phenomena. You can't patent an abstract idea. You cannot patent an algorithm. But as we'll see in a little bit more detail, in practice, it seems like algorithms are patented all the time. One more note here. With the idea that you can't patent naturally occurring things, a really fantastic read is to look at the history of gene patenting. For a while, you were able to patent genes from just people or animals because you had gone ahead and extracted the gene out of the DNA of the cell. So for a while, courts allowed those patents, but that's been recently overturned, at least in the United States, by the U.S. Supreme Court. They've determined that you can patent modifications to a gene. So, for example, Monsanto and other large biotech firms, they patent the particular modifications to the gene and the process for making those modifications for some of their genetically modified, corn seeds and things like that. But they can't actually grow some corn that's naturally occurring and then patent the entire genome of that particular species. This is actually very, very good that I think that the Supreme Court's gone and adjusted that. I don't have links to that, but if you Google it, there's a number of different articles. This was just probably in 2013 that this happened, maybe 2014. So there's a lot of stuff that's been written about this. But, of course, this is a computer science class. Let's talk about algorithms. So can an algorithm be patented? Gottschalk v. Benton, 1972. SCOTUS, that's the standard acronym Supreme Court of the United States, SCOTUS. Interestingly, the President of the United States is POTUS, P-O-T-U-S, President of the United States. So SCOTUS, in this case, they disallowed patents that would, quote, wholly preempt the mathematical formula and in practical effect would be a patent on the algorithm itself. So this case, Gottschalk v. Benton, 1972, makes it pretty clear to me that algorithms can't be patented. You can't have a patent that would preempt the mathematical formula, and in practical effect would be a patent on the algorithm itself. Fantastic. You can't patent algorithms. So Diamond v. Deere, in 1981, SCOTUS claims, quote, a claim drawn to subject matter otherwise statutory does not become non-statutory simply because it uses a mathematical formula, computer program, or digital computer. So here they're saying, well, if it's something that otherwise would be patentable, statutory in this case means it falls under this statute, doesn't suddenly become unpatentable just because it uses mathematical formula, computer program, or digital computer. So they went on to say an invention is patentable if it is, quote, a mathematical formula and implements or applies the formula in a structure or process which, when considered as a whole, is performing a function which the patent laws were designed to protect. So, in other words, algorithms can be patented, sort of. And so this is this very complicated, blurry gray area that the Supreme Court's working here. They want to make it clear, and they did in that 1972 case, that you can't have a patent that is in essence a patent on the algorithm itself, but they don't want to go so far as to say that any code or any program or really any software can't be patented. So they're trying to define this area saying, well, suppose the thing being patented were some invention or some process that could be patented if it didn't use a computer. So just because it does use a computer or computer program and mathematical formulae, that doesn't mean that suddenly it can't be patented. So really the question is, how does this end up being interpreted by the courts? Because if you sort of go back a slide and you look at the language here, this seems to clearly say, clearly imply that algorithms can't be patented. You look at the language here, it seems to open up a whole lot of wiggle room and say, well, you kind of can patent things that involve programs, so it's a confusing gray area. So technically algorithms can't be patented, but seemingly algorithms get patented all the time, especially if you talk to people that work at places like, IBM or Google or Microsoft, or places that end up having a large patent portfolio, especially at companies. IBM, I think, is fairly well known for this. They get very excited when you patent something and you ask them, is this an algorithm patent? You'll get these really interesting stories. So here's a really cool blog post. God, I hope this link is still live. Here we go. So this is this is from 2011, so it's several years old. This is a researcher who works on machine learning, and this is a really, really interesting article looking at some of the pictures from his patent application, things like that. These are like these really non-specific flowchart pictures that don't really seem to have any meaning. So if you sort of read through this article, it's really interesting. Now, once again, this is just one person's perspective. I'm not trying to claim that, I've done an extensive study of software patents or anything, but it's a really interesting approach. Essentially what he's saying is anywhere that you would have seen the word algorithm, if you replace it with system or process, if you just kind of do a find and replace, now it doesn't look like you're trying to patent the algorithm and you have enough pictures, and so apparently you can get away with this. And if you go ahead and look at algorithm patents, there's a really interesting thread on the Stack Exchange with programmers discussing this. It's a really fantastically interesting discussion. Also a little bit depressing because it seems like there's at least a number of people in the community who are saying, well, yeah, you can patent algorithms, you just have to know how to write the patent application such that the patent clerk that's reading it is going to not think it's an algorithm because they don't see the word algorithm, and they're just going to go ahead and accept it and then give you the patent. So why are we concerned about software patents? Since that 1981 Supreme Court case, which kind of opened the door a little bit over that 1972 case, which seemed to very clearly make the case that you couldn't patent algorithms, we're looking at the number of patents that have been filed on things that are essentially software and computer-related things, according to the categorization system used by the U.S. PTO Patent and Trade Office. So you can see this huge explosion in the number of patents that have been granted.